In the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian army surrounded Jerusalem. The siege was absolute, brutal, and total. Look at how 2 Kings 25 describes the event. In just a few short verses, the defenses are breached, the royal palace is set on fire, and the entire city collapses. Standard military accounts from the ancient Near East conclude at this point, ending the narrative with the victor's triumph over a smoking ruin. But the biblical author suddenly halts the action. The text abruptly shifts away from the battlefield into something unexpected. This sudden stop marks the transition from a war chronicle to a theological autopsy. The author forces our attention past the rubble of the perimeter to the systematic destruction occurring deep within the city's heart. Immediately following the fall of the city, the text devotes 6 dense verses to a painstaking inventory of destroyed bronze objects. The author obsesses over exact items: bronze pillars, movable stands, a massive bronze sea, down to minor tools like pots, shovels, and wick trimmers. Why would someone living through the apocalyptic end of their civilization dedicate precious parchment to cataloging old plumbing and decorative metalwork? In the literature of the ancient world, extensive structural lists are never random. They serve as a deliberate architectural map meant to guide the reader. To comprehend the death of this nation-state, we have to look closely at why the text forces us to examine the shattered bronze pieces of Solomon's temple. This map illustrates the standard 3-strike protocol that empires like Assyria and Babylon utilize to subjugate neighboring states. Strike 1 begins when the empire arrives at your border, offers an alliance, and demands heavy financial tribute. Eventually, the vassal state revolts, triggering Strike 2. The empire returns, besieges the city, forces surrender, and installs a puppet king. When that king inevitably rebels, Strike 3 is executed. The empire returns with a mandate for total, unrecoverable annihilation. Babylon is simply executing standard foreign policy to ensure Judah lacks the infrastructure to ever rebel again. The biblical author, however, views these troop movements differently. To the writer, Babylon is an instrument of divine consequence. The physical leveling of the city was a matter of imperial strategy. The specific deconstruction of the temple, however, was dictated entirely by the covenant. The writer creates a textual mirror, linking the tragedy in 2 Kings 25 directly back to the glory detailed in 1 Kings 7. This diagram reveals how the exact phrases, measurements, and objects cataloged by the Babylonians match the construction records of Solomon. Look at the pillars. Both texts explicitly identify the 2 bronze pillars and note their identical height of 18 cubits. We see the same pattern with the bronze sea. The massive 15-foot basin Solomon cast is the exact same object now being violently broken apart by the imperial guard. The author notes fine details, like the decorative pomegranates and interwoven chains that adorned the capitals, intricate craftsmanship now reduced to scrap weight. This literary device is called an inclusio. These matching descriptions act as bookends, enclosing the entire history of the Israelite monarchy. Every single ounce of this bronze had been explicitly dedicated and consecrated for the eternal service of the Lord. By documenting the systematic reversal of Solomon's construction, the author shows the kingdom being unmade. We are watching the meticulous, piece-by-piece dismantling of Israel's physical and spiritual core. Why did God allow a house bearing his name to be turned into a heap of rubble? The answer goes back to God's explicit warning to Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 9. He stated that if the descendants turned away, the temple itself would become an object of ridicule. This diagram outlines the Deuteronomic grid, the 4-part philosophical framework the author uses to judge every ruler. The first requirement is absolute, exclusive devotion to Yahweh. The second is the absolute prohibition of idolatry. Humanity cannot reduce the divine into a manipulable form. The third requirement is the refusal to place ultimate trust in foreign alliances instead of trusting God. The fourth requirement demands social integrity, specifically hesed, generous kindness, and mishpat, justice for the vulnerable. A king could rule for decades, accumulate immense material wealth, and possess overwhelming military dominance. But if he failed this grid, the text writes him off as a failure. Apply this grid to the physical temple. God made it clear he did not ultimately care about a building. He cared about the covenantal fidelity of the people. Because the hearts of the people became corrupt, the beautiful physical structure was rendered entirely obsolete. The shattering of the bronze proves a broken covenant. By the end of chapter 25, the reality is bleak. The Davidic king has been deposed, the military has been wiped out, and the independent nation-state is finished. For generations, the people assumed the physical kingdom of Judah was synonymous with the kingdom of God. That assumption has now been violently proven false. The exile brings absolute psychological and theological darkness. The covenant appears to be irreparably severed. If the text concluded on this verse, it would leave us with nothing more than the tragedy of a failed geopolitical microstate. But just as the darkness completely settles over the narrative, the author provides one final, mysterious glimmer of light. The final setting occurs 37 years into exile, deep inside the heart of the Babylonian Empire. The closing verses of 2 Kings 25 detail a perplexing event. The newly crowned king of Babylon releases the exiled Judean king, Jehoiakim, from prison. The text specifically notes that Jehoiakim's head was lifted up. This is a direct echo of the Psalms, which describe God as the lifter of the king's head. Consider the geopolitical absurdity of this moment. A deposed king from a destroyed, irrelevant nation is suddenly given a seat of honor higher than all other kings at the Babylonian table. The deliberate design of this postscript suggests a shift in the nature of the kingdom. It explicitly frames Jehoiakim's release as proof that the story of God's people can survive the death of their nation. This single event proves that the Davidic line has survived. The loss of Jerusalem did not extinguish God's promise. The ultimate theological achievement of kings is proving that the kingdom of God cannot be constrained by a nation-state, an army, or a bronze temple. The physical architecture is gone, but the true throne endures.